Hello, happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of The Practice. This show is an unrehearsed look into my creative process. I'm Stuart. I'm a 3D artist, illustrator, and your pal. And I'm excited to have you back for episode 225. This week, as you can see from this sketch and some of the reference that I have pulled up here, we're going to be doing a tardigrade, or some people call them a water bear, or a moss piglet, I've even heard. Crazy little creature, little microscopic guy that can survive in very extreme conditions. I think we're going to be doing something a little different than typical this week. We're going to be, setting up the basic mesh in Cinema, and then we're going to pop over to Blender and use some of the really great sculpting tools that are featured in Blender, and we're going to add a lot of this surface detail, some wrinkles and some folds and divots and things like that, and give it a more realistic look, and add a lot of that, that imperfections and those interesting surface details that are going to make this really come to life as an illustration. And then, time permitting, we're going to come back to Cinema and use Octane to texture and light this. So I'm just going to pull some of this reference material over to my other monitor, and I'm going to get started. So this week is actually the first week in a really long time where I am streaming only to YouTube. What's up, Chiara Martini? Thanks for tuning in. How's it going? Like I was saying, I've been doing streams to Twitch and to Periscope as well. But I get basically no viewers from Twitch, to be honest. I think in all the years I've been over there, I've gotten like 50 followers. Not that that is what really matters, but that's how that's been. I've also done it over to Periscope, but I get basically very little viewership there as well. And Twitter is getting rid of Periscope in the next several months. So I figure, why not just focus on sort of my core offering, the core audience, where I spend most of my efforts anyway. That's you, YouTubers. So hello. All right. So like I mentioned, we're going to start off just by modeling this fairly basic body shape. I think we'll probably stick it all together with a volume measure as well, just so we have mostly a single mesh to deal with. I may include some other details as individual meshes, but we'll see. I did do a little test of this yesterday, so I have a fairly good idea of how I want to approach this. But there's always bits that are left to chance. Cool. So let's get the legs going. It looks like, based on the reference, that there are 8 legs on these little critters. It's interesting, when I was doing some research on reference for this episode, I ran across an article that said that in 2019, in the summer of 2019, or maybe it was the spring, I think it was maybe April, there was a spaceship that was headed for the moon, or a lander that was headed for the moon, that had all sorts of data that scientists wanted to back up, right, and get it off the planet. And at the last minute, they decided to include some human DNA and some live tardigrades in the payload. And unfortunately, the lander malfunctioned and crashed. So now there are dozens or maybe hundreds of tardigrades on the surface of the moon, which is really super interesting. All right, so I'm going to throw that in a null, and I'm going to throw that null into symmetry. We're just going to get these legs into place. Now this initial mesh really is going to be quite simple. Most of the modeling we're going to wind up doing over in Blender. So I'm going to throw all of this inside of a volume builder and mesher. Everything's going to be all collapsed upon itself at first. That's fine. Turn this voxel size to maybe 3. good. These aren't great here, but that's pretty easy to knock down. These little sort of webbed toe connections between the limbs. Need to go bigger on these as well. Here's that drawing that I've done. Let's see. Yeah, we could probably do, let's add sort of face shape. They've got basically just kind of a hole in the front of their heads, or even the front of their bodies. Could you call that a head? Maybe you could. I mean, if you wanted to get away with a really sort of simple reductive version of tardigrade, you could do something as simple as this, that folks might know what you're dealing with. And let's add a little tube. This guy I'm going to keep, I think, outside of the volume mesher. A moment. What's up, Ben? How's it going? Good to see you. I'm going to give these a few additional subdivisions just in case I decide to modify this inside of Blender as well. It's ready to go with some subdivisions there. And I think this is pretty close to good enough for our basic mesh. Yeah, let's kick this over to Blender and have a little fun sculpting. So I'm just going to export this as an FBX, which seems to be a format that everybody's happy with. And I'll just pop into Blender. I'm just gonna, I've got a basic sculpting scene set up here. Just gonna delete that. Let's import an FBX. Cool. And that came through pretty clean. Nice. So let's go back. Let's see. Delete that editor. We need to delete the light as well. Let's go back into sculpt mode. Let's set up some of these options here with our brushes. I definitely want Dyno Topo turned on. It's going to give me that little error, which is fine. I like to have constant detail turned on, and I'll turn this to say, and let's say 15 for the moment. See what that gets us. That's pretty good. Let's turn on smooth shading. We've got symmetry turned on, which is good for now. I might turn that off later. Now I'm gonna start working with my tablet and just some of these simple sculpting tools, and I'm gonna be smoothing things out and joining these, and well, you'll see. I'm just gonna modify this and give this a much more organic feel. So I'm just smoothing out the area where the main part of the body and the limbs meet. So I feel like maybe these limbs stick out too far and maybe they need to point down a little bit more. Actually could have done that in cinema, but maybe we can do that with these hooks in here. Dog's having a little fun. You can see there. There's a couple of different hook tools. To be honest, I'm not really well versed on the difference between them all. Ooh, that elastic deform seems to have a huge fall off. We'll get back to this. As is typical with a lot of sculpting tools, it looks like, you know, sort of the camera angle that I have relative to the object is going to affect the way the tool interacts with the mesh. So you always want to be kind of zooming around and panning and looking in different directions. So I might as well smooth some of this out. Well, now we've got some really some sort of prominent folds and wrinkles and stuff going on. Here's some of the reference imagery I'm working with. By the way, I've got this pulled up in my other monitor. So that's sort of what I'm using as a guide for some of these, you know, surface irregularities and stuff like that. So, whoops. We've got some sort of bumps and wrinkles going on that I want to roughly get in. Also looks like these kind of almost like the Michelin Man. There's these sort of, you know, body segments go from the limb kind of up onto the main body here, like swollen limbs. See, at the moment, I'm still working with fairly large brushes, as you sort of want to work from large to small in terms of detail. Typically, that's helpful. I do want to knock down these sort of elevated areas between the limbs. So I'm trying to add, you know, I'm using this draw sharp tool to add little surface indentations, some wrinkles here, but we're running into some sort of mesh density problems there. So I'm going to turn up the resolution on this brush a little bit, which should allow us to draw smoother and finer kind of wrinkles. That's not really working. Let's actually see what we're working with here a little better. Let's go even higher. It's interesting that this Draw Sharp tool isn't remeshing like you'd expect it to, even though Dynatopo's turned on. Huh. Well, that's good to know. So I'm going to draw in areas of higher detail first. Now, all that initial blocking that I wound up doing in Cinema obviously could be done in Blender. I'm just not as familiar with it. And so it's just a little quicker for me to work in Cinema. But obviously, can do a lot of that in any variety of 3D suites, I'm sure. What's up, Designer? Tough to pronounce your name. One of the reasons, maybe the main reason that I like hopping over to Blender for sculpting is because of, well, there's a greater diversity of tools, but they also have this feature called Dynotopo, which basically allows you to add resolution, to add subdivisions to the surface of your mesh dynamically as you're working in areas that need greater resolution. And the sculpting has just seemed a little bit more intuitive and just sort of a little bit better in Blender, to be honest. There is a greater diversity of tools, and that Dynotopo is really awesome. I also have something called the cloth brush, which I want to play with more. And you can actually, I was thinking about even using it to like do surface deformations on this guy. But you can really, it's running slow, probably because of, maybe because I have Dynotopo on. It's weird that it's not working. But basically this just adds like wrinkles, like really sort of realistic wrinkles to the surface of an object. Could be because it's overlapping. I'm gonna not mess with that at the moment. But the cloth brush is really awesome. I'll definitely feature that on this show at some point in the future when I can. Do seem to kind of have these little feet, and they have little hair-like looking claws. That might be good to add. Oops. Yeah, and the benefit of Blender as well is that it's free. So if you're starting out in 3D art, not sure if you want to make the investment, Blender is definitely a cool place to start. Although I should say that I did that when I was first getting into 3D art, and I really had a tough time with Blender's UI. It was a little bit tricky to work with, but that was 10 some odd years ago, maybe closer to 12, and so there have been a lot of improvements made in the meantime, and you might find it's easier and better, and there's more artists sharing resources and how-tos online as well. So couldn't hurt. That's all I'm saying. All right. It really is. Whole different ball of wax. What's up, 192? Happy Tuesday. What's up, Caesar? All good points. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah. Cool. Can't believe I hadn't saved it that whole time. Don't do that. Cool. So I think, you know, we could continue detailing this and working with it, but it's feeling pretty tardigrade like to me at the moment. So I think we're about to go back to cinema and see if we can't, you know, add a little bit of a materiality to this and some quick lighting. We'll render out an image and call it an episode. So it came together pretty quick, and you can see how, you know, sometimes sculpting really is just the best way to quickly add a lot of interesting detail, especially when you're dealing with sort of organic shapes like this. Right? Just sort of breaking up the surface a little bit. Cool. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my tablet, and then I'm going to, let's export this. Export this back as an FBX. I'll call this Sculpt 2 because I think there's already one in there. I'm going back to cinema. And so you can see this is what we started with. We've obviously made it a lot more interesting, a lot more realistic. So I'm going to call this original. Oh, close enough. Yeah, I do need to. What's up, guys? Just catching up with some of these comments here. I used a company called Puget Systems, and basically they were able to build me a computer that was customized for like my Cinema 4D needs at my price point. They're really, really sweet. They're the same company that actually supplies computers to the Quadro crew, who you may have heard of. And like I knew I needed, you know, I made the switch from Mac to PC, and I knew that I needed something with more power. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, you should build your own PC," and that was a little daunting, to be honest, and because I've never done it before, and because, oops, I think I just brought in the wrong mesh. Well, and because, you know, with client work and with not being an expert in building computers, I wanted something with a warranty that I could, you know, call them up if something went wrong. And luckily, you know, it's been, you know, over 6 months and everything's been running really great so far. But anyway, I'd recommend Puget Systems, and I've got a, you know, NVIDIA Quadro RTX graphics card. That's where most of the money from this build went into. All right, so let's see. Hold on, let me pay attention here. So we need number 2.fbx. I'm going to merge that in. It's hard to manage files and GAB at the same time, so thanks for bearing with me. Now you can see we've got a much higher mesh thing we're dealing with here, but it's a lot more realistic. So I'm gonna pop over to our Octane layout that I've set up. Yeah, I mean, you've got a great point, Sardav. ZBrush is, you know, the industry standard and probably your best sculpting tool available for 3D artists, but that is also several $1,000s. They have a free option called Sculptress. I think that's still around. I haven't used it in a very long time. It has a lot of their features. It's sort of like a freebie, version of ZBrush, but Blender is much better than it now. So, granted, it's not the best available, but for a free, you know, adjunct to use to, you know, help out my typical Cinema 4D work, I think it's pretty excellent. So cool. So we've got our mesh back into Cinema. I've got our Octane viewer pulled up. I'm gonna add some lights and some materials, and we'll get an image ready. call it an episode. Octane lights are always super bright right away. And that's going to really help us see all these wonderful little imperfections we've sculpted. It's feeling very much like a tardigrade. Let's make this sort of a warmer light. Looks cool. Let's add in a sky. That's looking good. I think we can add one more light, sort of a low light. Whoa there, partner. I'm going to make this one even a little less powerful, and maybe we'll push that towards the blue end, whoops, of the color spectrum. And I'll grab both of these and turn the opacity down, because I don't need to see them. I don't want to see them. Cool, cool. All right, and now I think we should add a specular material and give this creature a sort of cellular look. I think a lot of the visualizations that you get from it are like computer enhanced or artist renditions, right? So I don't know if we know exactly what this dude looks like. This kind of looks like normal maps, doesn't it? That's that, enhanced 3D stuff. So I'm going to give him sort of a see-through cellular sort of look, like something you'd see under a microscope, which I think is going to be a little bit more realistic, or it might be more similar to what the creature looks like in real life. Yeah, I think that's right, Caesar. But you just can't beat the price point of Blender, and it's improved by leaps and bounds over the years. So I imagine it'll only get better. That's sort of the advantage of open source software in a way. So you see, I've gone into medium and added a scatter. I'm gonna pull the density down. And let's add some colors into the absorption and scattering. And I think kind of a pinkish color might be appropriate here. And I always forget, one of the channels is actually not for color, it's just sort of for density. And that's the scattering. As you can see, this color, just a little bit will do you in that color channel. Make it a little bit more dense. Juicy little guy. I'm going to add a noise to the reflection channel just to break up the surface a little bit. Turn the scale down on that. Right, whereas ZBrush is not necessarily the greatest for rendering, and I think it probably has some good UVing tools, if I'm not mistaken. should we add a little opacity? I'm not going to add the opacity. And I'm going to start turning off some of these channels that we might not need. Mm-hmm. Really? Is that true, Caesar? Um, Octane has a free Blender plugin? That's crazy. I did not know that. Very cool. Wow, that's cool. All right, so I'm not sure what the best angle is for our dude here. Probably something over here. We give him a very transparent look. Somewhere in between is probably the way to go. That's kind of waxy looking. And it's too bad because I want to give him that transparent look, but adding a lot of transparency will make it much harder to see all the wonderful details we've added. Nah, don't want to mess with that. Yeah, totally. Although YouTube often doesn't like links in the comments, so it might bump it automatically. In which case, I apologize. I'm not doing that on purpose. Cool. So we wanted to get really crazy. We could add little tiny hairs to the surface of this because I think they do have little hairs. I think we could let's break up the color just a little bit too. And lastly, let's get a camera in here and play with the imager and see if we can't get a little bit more contrast and visibility out of some of our shapes. Last little pass here. Hey Jax, Octane is at the moment. For a really long time, I was just using the native Cinema 4D rendering engine, which I was able to get pretty good results out of. But about maybe 4 or 5 months ago, especially with the new computer, I felt the need to, try some new stuff out. It's really flexed the capabilities of the new graphics card and all that good stuff. So I decided to invest in Octane. And man, to be honest, I wish I'd done it sooner. It really there's a lot of features that it added. Also, I can't speak for a lot of other engines. I'm mostly familiar with Octane, but there's a whole bunch of additional features like the scatter, which is basically like a cloner that works really well, and these fog volumes are super sweet too. Plus the ability to be able to grab your. I know you can do this in Cinema, but not quite as intuitively as you can in Octane, in my opinion. You can just start doing sort of color correction and post processing work like right in the camera, right in Cinema itself, which I've been lately sort of sometimes skipping the step of jumping into Photoshop after the fact. So I like doing this spectral shift thing to push some additional color into sort of your bloom here. Cool. And lastly, maybe this might be overkill, but maybe we add a little bit of depth of field. So I'm going to turn autofocus off. I'm going to select our little snout area as our area of sharpness. Yeah, Jax, Octane isn't too bad. If you do a single studio license, I think it's called, or a single user license, it's like $15 a month. I think it's closer to like 10 or 12 if you do the yearly thing. So, it's not included, but it's not terrible. It's less expensive than I thought it might be. I mean, if you employ 10 designers at a studio, it's going to be expensive to invest, but But yeah, for a single user, it's not as bad as you might think. There's another thing I like about Octane's renderer is the depth of field is a lot more intuitive. I can just like click an area in the image that I want to be sharp or I want to focus, and I can adjust it with sliders. It was always a little less intuitive for me inside of Cinema. I would wind up doing post effects for some of my blurs. Oops. All right. So that was a fun exercise. It was kind of simple. Really, just we've got a fairly dense mesh here with some sculpted details that we built, the base of really quickly in Cinema. Popped over and played around with some of the sculpting tools inside of Blender, which I think is really fun and something I want to explore more of on videos in this channel. And then, we jumped back into Cinema to render it out and come up with the image that you're seeing now. So hopefully this was useful. If it was, please appreciate a thumbs up or a subscription. Hit that bell button to be notified of the videos that we drop every Tuesday. If you want to keep up with me and the work that I'm doing, hit me up at DLGNCE on Instagram and the other social medias. The website is diligence.studio. And if you want to support the practice, if you want to buy your buddy here a coffee, check out the link in the description below and see how you can help support what we're doing here. Really appreciate each and every one of you. And until next week, this is Stuart saying thanks a lot for tuning in. Catch you later. Goodbye.